I never thought a single sentence could shatter everything I believed in. I remember the moment vividly, how the air between us felt heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name yet. My wife, Francine, stood across from me in our living room, arms crossed, her lips curling into a smirk I had never seen before. It wasn't her usual frustration or irritation. It was something else, something cold. "You'll regret standing up to me." The words rolled off her tongue with such confidence, such finality, that a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. For years, I had been the kind of husband who avoided conflict. I took the high road, compromised, and reassured myself that a good marriage meant being patient, being understanding. But in that moment, I realized I had been fooling myself. I wasn't in a partnership. I was in a game I didn't even know I was playing. Francine had always had a way with people. Charismatic, witty, and effortlessly charming. She knew exactly how to get what she wanted. When we first met, I admired that about her. But now, standing in our home, with her looking at me like an opponent rather than a husband, I realized something unsettling. I had no idea who I had really married. At first, I thought our argument was just another marital disagreement. But it wasn't. It wasn't about the dinner plans I had forgotten to confirm or the way I corrected her in front of her friends. It wasn't about the small things we usually bickered over. This was about control. And for the first time in our marriage, I had refused to back down. That was my mistake. Because over the next few weeks, Francine would make sure I paid for it. The change didn't happen overnight. It was slow, deliberate, and impossible to prove. At first, it was little things. Friends who used to text me regularly stopped responding. Invitations to family gatherings somehow never reached me. Conversations that once felt warm and welcoming now carried a strange, awkward tension. At work, my colleagues, who had always been friendly, started acting distant. And then, I noticed it in our own home. Francine would make offhand comments, subtle, well-placed words that seemed innocent on the surface, but left me questioning myself. "You've been really distracted lately. Are you sure you're not imagining things? I told my family about your little outburst. They were shocked, honestly." I wasn't losing my mind. I knew I wasn't. But that was the thing about Francine. She never needed to lie outright. She just had to plant the seed. And soon, people started seeing me the way she wanted them to. I became the problem. The husband who was too sensitive. The man who overreacted. The one who just couldn't keep his wife happy. But even as I felt my world slowly shifting around me, I told myself that it was just a rough patch, that we would get through it. I was wrong, because the worst was yet to come. I don't know when I first started feeling truly alone. Maybe it was the night I came home to find Francine whispering into her phone, only for her to hang up the moment she saw me. She looked at me with an expression that was too neutral, too controlled. She was never one to startle easily, but that night, she was caught off guard. "Who was that?" I had asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She sighed, shaking her head as if she was exhausted by me. "Why do you always have to make something out of nothing, Lowell?" That was the first real crack in my sanity. Had I been making something out of nothing? At first, I convinced myself that I was just overanalyzing things. That maybe I was being too sensitive. But the changes around me were impossible to ignore. Her family, who once welcomed me like their own, barely spoke to me now. Her friends, who used to invite me to gatherings, stopped acknowledging me altogether. Even my own friends were acting different, like they knew something I didn't. And then there were the looks. The knowing glances exchanged when I entered a room. The hushed whispers that would die down whenever I was near. Francine had done something. I just didn't know what yet. The subtle attacks. If she had yelled at me, if she had thrown things, if she had stormed out in a fit of rage, I could have handled that. But that wasn't Francine's style. Instead, she planted small doubts everywhere. She made me the villain in stories I wasn't even aware of. At a dinner with some of her friends, I noticed how different they were toward me. Their smiles were polite, but cold. Their eyes darted to Francine for confirmation before they spoke. I reached for my glass of water, and as I did, I heard her say, just loud enough for everyone to catch, "He's been so distant lately. I think work is stressing him out." It was such a simple sentence. So innocent. So casual. But it planted a seed. I could feel their silent judgment, the way their eyes studied me. They saw a husband who wasn't engaged. A man who was retreating into himself. And Francine? She just sighed and gave me a soft, pitying smile. "I just want my husband back." I wanted to scream. I was right here. I hadn't changed. But that was the brilliance of her manipulation. She wasn't accusing me of anything. She was just sharing her concern. And that made it impossible to fight back. Losing control, I started doubting my own memories. Had I really been distant? Had I actually snapped at her last week the way she described? The worst part was that I had no proof of anything. I couldn't go to anyone and say, my wife is turning people against me. Because how would that sound? Paranoid, desperate, pathetic. So, I did the one thing I never thought I would do. I started watching her. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that would make me look like the controlling husband she was slowly painting me to be. But I paid attention. I noticed how she always kept her phone face down when we were together. I noticed how she started dressing up more, wearing perfume even when she was just running errands. I noticed how, whenever I brought up the tension between us, she would laugh. Lowell, you're being ridiculous, she'd say, rolling her eyes. You sound crazy. That word, crazy. It stuck to me like tar, thick and suffocating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't. But if I didn't find out the truth soon, I would be. The breaking point. One evening, after another silent dinner, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So, after she went to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do. I took her phone. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it. My stomach churned with guilt. But I had no choice. I scrolled through her messages, expecting to find something. A name. A conversation. Anything to explain why my world was unraveling. And then, I saw it. A thread with her sister, Margot. At first, it was normal. Casual conversations about their parents, about work. But then, my breath caught in my throat as I saw my own name. Margot, does he know? Francine, no. And he never will. He's too trusting. He actually believes I love him. My entire body went cold. What the hell did that mean? Margot, I still think you should just tell him. Francine, why? So he can play the victim? He'll look pathetic. Besides, everyone's already on my side. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs. This wasn't just in my head. This wasn't paranoia. She was doing this on purpose. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, my hands trembling. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Because now, I knew the truth. I just didn't know what to do with it yet. I sat in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my mind a chaotic storm of thoughts I couldn't quiet. The words I had read on Francine's phone echoed in my head on an endless loop. He actually believes I love him. Was it all a lie? Our entire marriage? The years we spent together? The memories we built? Had I been nothing more than a placeholder in her life? I turned my head and looked at her. She was sleeping soundly, her breathing even, peaceful. I felt sick. How could she sleep so easily while I was falling apart? I wanted to wake her up, to confront her, to demand answers. But I knew how that would go. She'd twist the situation, make it seem like I was overreacting. She'd call me paranoid, maybe even laugh at me. And worst of all, she would have the entire world backing her up. So I did nothing. I lay there, in the dark, drowning in the terrifying realization that I was completely alone. The world feels different now. When morning came, Francine acted as if nothing had happened. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she had a lunch date with some friends, and disappeared out the door without a second glance. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from my untouched coffee. I felt like I had stepped into an alternate reality, one where everyone was playing a role in a script I hadn't been given. I needed to know more. So, I did something I never imagined I'd do. I started reaching out to people. People who had been pulling away from me. People who, up until recently, had been a regular part of my life. Friends, her family members, even some mutual acquaintances. I kept it casual. No accusations, no paranoia. Just small talk. But the answers I got? They terrified me. Some were polite but distant, as if they didn't want to get involved. Some hesitated before answering, like they were struggling with what to say. And some just outright avoided me altogether. Something was deeply wrong. The whispers behind my back. The moment I truly knew things had gone too far was when I ran into Francine's cousin, Elliot, at a grocery store. We weren't close, but we always got along well enough. I figured if anyone in her family would be honest, it would be him. At first, he seemed nervous, shifting uncomfortably as he placed items in his cart. But when I pressed, gently, carefully, his expression darkened. Look, Lowell, I don't want to be involved in this. Involved in what? I asked, my stomach twisting. Elliot sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Francine's been saying things. About you. To the family. To friends. My throat went dry. What kind of things? He hesitated. That you've changed. That you're angry all the time. That you're unstable. The air left my lungs. What? She's making it seem like you're the problem, he admitted, glancing around like he didn't want to be seen talking to me. She's really convincing, man. Even my mom believes her. And you know my mom doesn't believe anything. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. It all made sense now. Why people had been treating me differently. Why they looked at me with something between pity and hesitation. Francine had been building a narrative, one where she was the innocent wife and I was the troubled, distant husband. And worse, people believed her. The phone call that changed everything. I drove home in a daze, my thoughts tangled in a million different directions. I had suspected she was manipulating things, but this was calculated, premeditated. She wasn't just trying to turn people against me. She was setting up a story where she could leave me and no one would question her, where she could be the victim, and I would be the problem. I parked in the driveway but didn't get out of the car. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process everything. Then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. Lowell. The voice was quiet, hesitant. Yes? Who is this? There was a pause. Then, it's Margot. My entire body went rigid. Francine's sister. She was the last person I expected to call me. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice laced with something that sounded a lot like guilt. I don't know if it's too late, but I think you should know the truth. And just like that, I knew. The worst was yet to come. I gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Margot had never called me before. She and Francine were close, the kind of sisters who could communicate with just a glance. If Margot was reaching out to me, that meant something was seriously wrong. What do you mean, I should know the truth? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. A deep sigh crackled through the line. I shouldn't even be calling you. If Francine finds out. Margot, please. My voice was quieter now, more desperate than I wanted it to be. There was a long pause. Then she finally spoke. Lowell. She's been planning this for months. It felt like someone had yanked the floor out from under me. What? The way she's been talking about you to everyone, the way she's acting like you've changed, it's not random. She's been setting this up. I didn't think much of it at first, but lately, I don't know. It feels wrong. I swallowed hard. Setting up for what? Another pause. Then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear her, Margot said, for leaving you. But not just that. She wants to ruin you first. The words didn't make sense at first. Ruin me? Why? Divorce was one thing. I knew plenty of people who had grown apart and gone their separate ways. It hurt, but it was something I could accept. But this wasn't just about ending our marriage. Margot, I need you to tell me everything. She hesitated again, but this time, she didn't back down. She's been telling people that you've been acting erratic, that you're controlling, that she feels unsafe around you. She's dropping little comments here and there to make it seem like she's been suffering in silence. My stomach twisted. That's not true. I know. She sighed again. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe she was just exaggerating because you guys were fighting more. But then I saw the way she was talking to our parents, to her friends. Lowell, they all believe her. She's making sure that when she leaves, she won't just be the victim. She'll be the one who was brave enough to escape a toxic marriage. I leaned back in my car seat, my head hitting the headrest as I exhaled shakily. She's turning me into the bad guy. Yes. The pieces fell into place in my mind, clicking together like a twisted puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. That was why her family barely spoke to me now. Why her friends avoided me. Why even my own friends seemed unsure of how to act around me. Francine had been rewriting the story of our marriage while I was still living in it. And I had been completely oblivious. Why are you telling me this? I asked finally. Margot hesitated again before saying, because it's wrong. Because you don't deserve this. And because she cut herself off, then let out a breath. Because she's seeing someone else, Lowell. I closed my eyes. I don't know why that was the part that hit the hardest. Maybe because, deep down, I already knew. I had seen the signs, the late nights, the secrecy, the way she had stopped caring about keeping up appearances around me. But hearing it confirmed? It felt like a knife in the gut. Do you know who? My voice barely sounded like my own. Another pause. Not yet, but I know it's someone close. My mind started racing. Who was close to us? Who had been around enough for her to weave them into her story? My thoughts landed on a few names, but none of them felt right. What do I do? Get ahead of it, Margot said firmly. She's setting you up to look like the villain. If you don't do something, everyone, including the people who still believe you, will turn against you. I felt cold, not just physically, but in my bones, in a way that made me realize that this was real. This wasn't a bad dream I was going to wake up from. Francine wasn't just leaving me. She was dismantling my entire life. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, Margot. I don't want to be involved in this, she warned. If she finds out I told you, she'll come after me too. I won't say a word. The call ended, but the storm in my mind was just beginning. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the dashboard, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. She's seeing someone else. She's making me out to be unstable. She's setting me up. I needed to think. I needed to be smart. Because this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was a war, and I was losing. I didn't go inside right away. The house, our house, looked different now. The front door that once felt like an entrance to my safe space now seemed like a barrier, something separating me from the life I thought I had. The windows were dark, the curtains drawn, as if Francine had been closing me out little by little before I even noticed. My phone was still in my hand, Margot's words circling in my head like a never-ending loop. She's setting you up. She's seeing someone else. Everyone believes her. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. No, I wasn't going to let her do this to me. For too long, I had let Francine take control of our narrative. I had let her paint herself as the innocent, devoted wife while quietly tearing me down behind my back. I had ignored the small red flags, dismissed the growing distance, convinced myself that our marriage was just going through a rough patch. But now I saw the truth, and I wasn't about to just sit back and let her destroy me. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car. As I unlocked the front door and walked inside, I braced myself for whatever was coming next. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Francine was home. Her car was in the driveway. But there were no sounds of her moving around, no clinking of dishes or low hum of the TV. I walked through the living room, past the dimly lit hallway, until I reached our bedroom. And that's when I saw her, sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in her hands, completely engrossed in whatever she was reading. She didn't even look up. You're home late. Her voice was calm, casual, like nothing had changed, like she hadn't spent months setting me up for something I didn't even fully understand yet. I watched her for a moment, trying to see her the way I used to, the way I wanted to. But I couldn't. That version of her, the one I thought I knew, was gone. Or maybe she had never been real to begin with. Who were you talking to? She asked suddenly, still not looking up. My heart clenched. She knew. Maybe not about Margot's call, but she sensed something was different. And if I wasn't careful, she'd find a way to twist this too. Just a work call. I lied, keeping my voice even. Finally, she looked at me. Her gaze was unreadable, but I could see something in her eyes. Calculation. She was studying me, trying to piece together whether I was telling the truth. Work? She repeated, tilting her head slightly. At this hour? I shrugged. It happens. For a moment, she just stared at me. Then, without another word, she stood up, walked past me, and disappeared into the bathroom. The door clicked shut. I let out a slow breath. She was watching me now, closely, and that meant I had to be smarter. I sat on the edge of the bed, running my hands over my face. I needed a plan. I needed to figure out who she was seeing. I needed to get ahead of whatever she was planning. And most of all, I needed proof. The next morning, Francine was already up before me. When I walked into the kitchen, she was standing by the counter, dressed up more than usual. Hair curled, light makeup, perfume. She turned when she heard me enter, flashing me a quick smile. Morning. I studied her carefully. Got somewhere to be? She shrugged. Just meeting a friend. Which friend? Something flickered across her face. Annoyance, maybe, but she covered it quickly. Jessica. I nodded slowly. Jessica. A friend I hadn't seen in months. A friend who, if I called right now, probably wouldn't even pick up. I forced a small smile. Have fun. She grabbed her purse and keys, then walked past me, pausing only for a second before saying, You should get out more too, Lowell. Might be good for you. And then she was gone. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. I could follow her. But if she saw me, she'd turn it against me. No, I had to be smarter. I pulled out my phone and made a call. Hey, it's Lowell. I need a favor. If Francine was playing a game, then so was I. And I was done playing by her rules. I watched from the window as Francine's car backed out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. A part of me wanted to jump into my own car and follow her, to see exactly where she was going. But that would be reckless. That's what she would expect, something easy to twist, something she could use to reinforce the lies she was spreading about me. I had to be patient. I had to be smart. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. The call I made last night had been a shot in the dark, but it was the only idea I had. If Francine had been careful enough to manipulate our entire social circle, then the only way to get answers was to find someone who hadn't been pulled into her web. And that person was Bradley. Bradley was an old friend from college, someone I had drifted away from over the years. He never really liked Francine, and because of that, she had subtly encouraged our distance. But he was one of the few people who hadn't turned cold toward me. When I called him last night, I only said one thing. I need your help. Can you meet me? And to my surprise, he said yes. I grabbed my keys and left the house. If I was going to take back control of my life, I had to start now. Bradley was waiting for me at a quiet cafe on the other side of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize us. When I walked in, he looked up from his coffee and nodded toward the seat across from him. You look like hell. I let out a dry chuckle. Yeah, well, I've been living in it. I sat down, resting my hands on the table, trying to figure out where to start. Bradley leaned back in his chair. So, what's going on? I hesitated for only a moment before I told him everything. The manipulation. The lies. The way people had been treating me differently. The message thread I had found between Francine and Margot. The phone call with Margot herself. Bradley didn't say anything at first. He just listened, his expression unreadable. When I finally finished, he exhaled sharply. I can't say I'm surprised. I frowned. What do you mean? He rubbed his jaw. Francine has always been calculated. I remember how she used to control every little thing in your life. But I didn't think she'd take it this far. I ran a hand through my hair. She's seeing someone else. I just don't know who. Bradley was quiet for a moment, then said, I might be able to help with that. I blinked. What? He pulled out his phone and started scrolling. One of my coworkers has a friend who works at the Regent. I froze. The hotel? Bradley nodded. I didn't think much of it at the time, but a couple weeks ago, he mentioned seeing Francine there. And she wasn't alone. My pulse pounded in my ears. Who was she with? Bradley hesitated. He didn't say. Just that she looked close with whoever it was. I clenched my fists. I needed proof. If I walked into this blind, she'd deny everything. She'd twist it. Make me look like the paranoid husband spying on his wife. Can your guy find out when she was there last? Bradley studied me carefully. You sure you want to do this? I don't have a choice. That night, I lay in bed next to Francine, listening to the rhythmic rise and fall of her breathing. I thought about the way she had smiled at me that morning, the way she had acted like everything was normal. But it wasn't. And soon, she'd know that I knew. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to stay calm. The next 48 hours would change everything. The next morning, I woke up before Francine. I lay there for a few moments, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. Today was the day I was going to find out the truth. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake her. She shifted slightly under the covers but didn't stir. I watched her for a second, this woman I had built a life with, the woman I had trusted. She looked peaceful, almost innocent. But I knew better now. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and walked out of the room, shutting the door behind me as quietly as possible. Bradley had sent me a message late last night. Got something. Meet me at my place. 8 a.m. I exhaled slowly. This was it. When I arrived at Bradley's apartment, he was already waiting outside, pacing near his car. The moment he saw me, he gestured for me to follow him inside. I barely had time to sit down before he handed me his phone. I got the hotel records. I stared at the screen. It was a list of dates and times, all of them showing check-ins under Francine's name. But she wasn't alone. There was another name listed under the second guest. Mason O'Connor. I read the name again, my stomach tightening. It was familiar. Too familiar. I looked up at Bradley, my voice flat. Tell me this isn't who I think it is. He sighed, rubbing his jaw. It is. Mason. One of my closest friends. The realization hit like a hammer to my chest. She hadn't just been cheating, she had been doing it with someone I trusted. Someone I had confided in. The anger burned through me like wildfire. All those times Mason had looked me in the eye and acted like nothing was wrong. I clenched my fists, trying to control my breathing. I needed to stay calm. I couldn't let this consume me. "There's more," Bradley said hesitantly. I looked back at the phone. There was a text message exchange attached to the file. I scrolled through it, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Francine, I think he's catching on." "Mason, then we need to move faster." "Francine, I just need a little more time. He won't see it coming." I gritted my teeth. She was planning something, and I had no idea what it was. When I got back home, Francine was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like it was any other day. She looked up when I walked in, tilting her head. "You're up early." I forced a small smile. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded, then leaned against the counter. "I was thinking we should have dinner with my parents this weekend. It's been a while since we've seen them." I studied her carefully. This was a test. She was trying to see if I suspected anything. "Yeah," I said casually, pouring myself some coffee. "That sounds nice." She smiled, but her eyes stayed on me, watching for any reaction. I wouldn't give her one. Not yet. Because now, I had the truth. And soon, she would know that I knew. I stood in the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, watching Francine move around like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't spent months lying to me, betraying me. But the truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I was done feeling hurt. Done feeling trapped. I had the truth now, and that meant I had the power. I set my coffee down and leaned against the counter. "Actually, about dinner with your parents." I started, my voice casual. Francine looked up, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah." I smiled. A real smile. One she didn't expect. "I think it's a great idea. But let's invite Mason too." The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She tried to cover it, forcing a laugh. "Mason? Why?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "You two seem close." Her hand tightened around her coffee cup. "That's ridiculous." "Is it?" I tilted my head. "I mean, you do spend a lot of time together. At the Regent, for example." The mug slipped from her grip and shattered on the floor. The silence between us stretched, thick with the weight of everything she had done. She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't." For the first time in months, she didn't have anything to say. I took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. I expected to feel rage, to want some kind of revenge. But instead, all I felt was relief. Because I was free. I picked up my car keys, walking toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To start over." I turned to look at her one last time. "You wanted to ruin me, Francine. But all you did was set me free." And with that, I walked out the door without looking back. I wasn't the victim of her story anymore. I was writing my own,